I'm Heléne Alexopoulos, and I was a principal dancer with the New York City Ballet.
Great. So I don't want to get too into the mud, but right away. But I thought that this was like a really interesting place to start because watching the memorial, your speech was very touching, but you had something very funny to say where an older dancer, or a more senior dancer rather, came up to you before your first rehearsal with Robbins. You said you were going to be one of his guinea pigs, and they warned you that Jerry could be tough, and you said, what did you say?
I said, "Oh, Jerry, he's got nothing on Maria," and I said it with love. She was tough in the ways that we all know ballet teachers, coaches, choreographers can be, but in a way that also strengthened you. So there's a fine line there, but yeah, I in a way working with Jerry was easy from that respect. And I was so grateful because I loved working with Jerry. I loved working with Mr. B. But I was also really one of the blessed ones. I felt that I could be a Mr. B because we were all Mr. B's dancers, but not everyone was a Jerry dancer. So I felt like I had a double.
And that's interesting because you were so molded by Maria, so that would make one think, and obviously you're super leggy and everything, so one would think that you would just fit perfectly only into the Balanchine. So do you think Maria gave you anything besides just the interpersonal tools to become kind of a Jerry person as well?
That's interesting because Maria did overlap somewhat with Jerry, and they even danced, and they did Prodigal Son, and Prodigal Son was a ballet that I loved doing and did a great deal. And it was funny because Maria and I would talk when she would like coach me on different things. She would be like, "Well, I wasn't very good in Prodigal," and so I was like, "Well, I liked it," and so we were different, even though we were very similar, height, length, body type, and in some sense style. I think we really met in many ways on being musical. And musicality, as we all know, is such a cornerstone for Mr. B and for Jerry. And Mr. B played music, Maria played piano. She would speak about how she and George would play the piano together. And I had studied violin and piano, had to give them up as time went on, but she used to say that I was very musical, so to me that was a supreme compliment because you can always work on your tendus. I think sometimes innate musicality, sort of what I call true musicality, is sort of like, can you hear music? Are you pitch? Do you have perfect pitch or don't you? So I think that was a positive part of my Tallchief upbringing.
And back to the coaching aspect, because you are physically like quite different, but there are similarities. So I do wonder.
Yes, this yes.
Exactly.
Which she would comment on a lot. Yes, and for me it was inspirational, actually. I would say too, because back then too it felt very blonde and blue, and so when I first auditioned for her and I saw her, didn't read about her or see her about it. I saw her, I was like, I kind of was like, okay.
Oh yeah, so tell us about that first time you saw her at the Opera House, right?
Oh, so the very first time I saw Maria, because I grew up in Oak Park, Illinois, and I would go into Chicago for my classes. And I had wonderful teachers before Maria. I give them full credit. And Richard Ellis and Christine Duboulay. We were at the Airy Crown. I don't really remember. I don't really remember what we were going to see. But my mother said, "Oh, there's Maria Tallchief, the famous ballerina." And I looked over and I was like, there she was. She was wearing like a white caftan and very, and just very Maria. And she had this stunning turquoise silver. And in my memories of her later on, I never saw her wearing sort of indigenous jewelry, although she gave Mr. B the famous bracelet. But that night she was, and I was sort of gobsmacked. I was like, wow. But then, she wasn't involved in the dance. Well, she wasn't teaching. She was just teaching sort of women in Chicago ballet, sort of like a social thing. So then the next time I met her for real was auditioning for her at the Lyric Opera Theater, and she was all in black. And there she was, and her presence is the presence we all know that we've seen in all the videos. She just was very commanding, and I was like, oh. And that was sort of like, I felt a ballet. And it's sort of, I think we had a kind of like...
Yeah, and she took a chance on you then, right?
Yes, because I really wasn't... I was just going there on a lark, because I really wasn't... She was auditioning adults. And I was like, well, I'm just going to go and just see her, and, nothing will come of it, but, it'll be fun. And then she called me over, and she was like, are you in school? Like, what's the truth? And I was like, yes, I'm in school, and la, la, la. She said, well, let's see what we can do. So she took me, and I would go back and forth from school, downtown, back to Oak Park, back again, perform at night. It was great. It was everything I could have hoped for, because I was performing now, like on a regular basis. And yes, it was the opera, so it wasn't like I was doing, Barocco and Allegro. But in the learning time, I was learning we were all learning her roles. So I was learning sanguinic and even roles that were made on her and not made on her. It was wonderful.
And yeah, you said the first class you had with her went a little bit over.
A lot over. The first class, so we started in the very first class, I have to say, was the hardest class I had ever had in my life up to that point. And it was easily 2 hours. And it was in the summer, and I mean, melting. And the things that I was seeing and learning, and that, like, the rond de jambes and the combinations. But she wasn't a choreographer. There are some teachers in ballet class where you're just like, by the time you've gotten the combination, you're like, I don't even know what that is, and what am I doing, and why am I doing it? It was all focused, as Mr. B's classes were, on a point. And you didn't have to, like, wonder what the point was. It was very clear, it was obvious, it was evident. She would speak about it, but you knew, the idea of tendus this way or this way was timing and understanding, emphasis on the right syllable or not. But it wasn't like zhuzhing around, which has its benefits, but that wasn't how she taught. And it was just everyday Maria, everyday Maria. And yet, I will say one thing. She did something that I thought was quite unique. She made us teach. So even
Did she watch when you taught?
Yes. And it wasn't a lot, because obviously I wasn't there to teach, I was there to learn. But she had this idea, and it was interesting and well-founded, that, it's like you can hear someone telling you to do something all the time, and you're supposed to point your feet, but then all of a sudden when you're standing up there and you're looking at everyone, you're like, no, I mean point your feet. It's and then when you go back in and stand at the bar, you're like, yeah, I get it now. So that was kind of a fun experience.
So her combinations were simple.
Yes, they were direct, they were simple, you didn't have to, like, they didn't go on and on. They were very like what Mr. B taught her, and how she was trained by him when they started in those years.
And she seemed like a big storyteller too. Did she have any particular gems she would tell in class? We can get to outside of class later, but
no, my most not personal, but the story that really resonates with me forever and ever, and which I've told many times, is that truly to this very day I cannot peel a potato and not think about Maria and Mr. B. So she would she was always talking about how you never sort of stopped. You know, even when you were out of class or you were still thinking and you were doing. And so she's like, I would be peeling potatoes and Mr. B would tell me to practice my sur le coup de pied. And so every time I peel my potatoes, I kind of like do a little, you know, sur le coup de pied and think of Maria and Mr. B. But she, you know, she had, of course, such a vast experience with him and knowledge of what he wanted, and yet she was very open to change. She was not one of those ballerinas, and she was a ballerina. And the word gets thrown around a lot these days, and I understand it's a different time, but she was a ballerina. And she would change. So when we were learning 4Ts, Mr. B, from the years that she had done it, had added and changed the finale. So things were different. And when we came to New York to learn it, because we were learning it and then taking it back to do a program in Chicago, this was before I came to the company, she had said, okay, well, I hear Mr. B's changed the finale, or someone said he's changed it, and she said, well, if George has changed it, we will change it. And that's I think is a very profound statement about her, understanding that time, while there's what was done for her and how it should be done and what was the reason he did it, he also changed, and she was able to have the humility to know that time did not stand still when her career ended and she walked out the door. So I took that as a very important lesson.
And that actually leads into my next point perfectly. It's like watching her coach you in Firebird and Orpheus. Obviously, you have like energetically and facially a lot of similarities, but physically there are big differences.
Yes.
And so it's like there is a lot of specificity in everything she says, but you always still end up looking like you. So like, how do you feel like she kind of, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like she didn't, it's the same kind of idea that it's different, but it's still the same.
Well, and I think that's the challenge in a way too, because wanting to understand her point. I mean, Maria's very specific about certain things that I didn't have sort of like in me or weren't natural to me, and one of them was her hand. And she was always very specific about how you have to feel a weight pushing against your hand, and I didn't have that. And you'll probably see in some of the coaching that I got a little florid, and she stopped me. So it's interesting too, you know, once you've had a career, and my career was not Maria's certainly, but to find that line of taking everything they're giving you, and yet finding a way to blend it in with sort of who you are to some extent and be true to the piece and to what Mr. B wanted and all of that. So I tried.
Did she ever talk to you about any, because I'm sure she saw you dance things other than Balanchine. Did she ever comment on those things, or was she more just focused on?
You know, that's interesting. By the time the company had started to do more other things like Billy's, so she never saw me do Forsyth. By then I think she had not been coming so often. Or when she came, she probably came to Mr. B's programs, and maybe there would be a Robbins piece in there. But yeah, she focused on the Balanchine, you know. So.
And would she have things to say to you about the roles? Because obviously you had some overlap, but there was also a lot of stuff you did that she never did. And so did she have things to say about that as well? Like, I'm thinking, you know, like episodes or something like that.
She never saw me in episodes, so she did. Unfortunately, or fortunately for her, I don't know. She didn't see everything I danced, certainly. But for instance, when I was cast to do Sugar Plum, she happened to be in town. She wasn't staying on to when I would be performing it, but you know, she called me over. She had a townhouse that she shared with Betty Cage, who was Mr. B's secretary and company manager before, you know, the subsequent generations. And she and Maria shared a townhouse. And John Terrace, who was also a very important person in the company lived in it. But Maria was visiting, and she said, well, come to the townhouse, and I will rehearse you. So I was there in my socks in her living room on the carpet, and we went through every moment of Sugar Plum, and then talked about the pas de deux and all those.
Do you remember anything specific that she said in those?
It was about the simplicity. There was not a lot of zhuzhing, you know what I mean, and it was made for her. So, and how you walk and how you present yourself. It wasn't so much like, and you have to be in fifth position when you do, sort of the things that we all know as a technical matter. She didn't fixate on those. And then we talked about that special place that we all get crazy about in the pas de deux, and I was like, why? She's like, well, I just did it. And I was like, okay. But everybody gets crazy in that moment. I don't know if you guys have a name for it now, but it's that moment. Twice.
So yeah, a lot of the things that you're talking about, Anne, in the coaching, it's so much about simplicity, do less, but then there's kind of just this real emphasis on presence and glamour. So can you talk about how she would kind of bring that out of people, or how she talked about that?
Right. She, I'm trying to think now, did she speak about glamour?
Or at least
And
it looks
not
like
so
glamour. I
much,
don't know if
but
it's-
exactly. Well, and there you go. And there's the thing is that training then was less about being spoon-fed every piece of information, and more about like, once you do this, well, Mr. B knew that automatically you would become beautiful. She was beautiful. And so, of course, two of the things that we all who've been trained know about, it was the cheek to the light. So épaule-main, we all do épaule-main, épaule-main, épaule-main. But then that's the first time that I'd heard about the cheek to the light, and you can be an épaule-main, and then the minute you think about it, it's that much, but a centimeter makes all the difference. And so it was just how you angle, you find the light, you look into the lake. When you look, you don't look down, you look out, because you know how the audience sees it. So things like that, the jewel on your chest, and all of that blends to making you just look something more.
Yeah, she said something beautiful, like, it's a lake specifically because when you think lake, there's a certain kind of poetry that comes on across your face.
Yes, I always think, I think of like those old 40s movies, and I don't know, Merle Oberon, and there she is, and I don't know, maybe they weren't smoking, but anyway, you look over the balustrade, and it's the lake and the light. You're right, it hits you differently. And it was very much about how Mr. B wanted to make his dancers, all of us, look beautiful, in addition to all of the other things, doing the great choreography.
So switching gears a little, she talked a lot in Firebird about kind of the Russian shoulders and how this was kind of character, and she also talked about, like, in Bizet First, it's very French with the wrists and everything. So is that something that she brought up, kind of like the differences of style within the Balanchine technique, of how you are presenting yourself or using the épaule-main?
That's interesting. I don't recall. She would say French, but then it wasn't like we lingered on, okay, now let's do this variation in the French style. But then you would see it certainly when someone like Violette would come. And in real time, I certainly got it. I saw it. And it was interesting for someone of my generation, because to get Maria, and obviously to have Mr. B and Jerry and all the teachers we had at SAB, and then to have been coached by others like Violette, like Suzanne. They all have their ways, and they're all their styles, and you just layer on layer on layer, and sometimes I would go to ask someone to come and work with me specifically because they had something that I didn't feel was organic or was mine. So I would ask Meryl Ashley, will you please come help me or work with me on this? Because I knew her approach was different in a way, and naturally one way versus mine, and I wanted to fill the gaps I didn't want someone just to say, yes, good, good. No, I wanted, like, how can I make this better? Where can I fill in where I'm lacking? And so Maria never let you feel like it was all good.
Yeah.
No. So.
To the opposite of that, I guess, did you ever run into a moment where you were doing something that Maria had really hammered in there, and someone was like, why are you doing that? And you're like, it's right.
That's an interesting question. I don't know. I think that some things, when I learned them, so when I learned Eurydice for Orpheus, it was sort of like, yeah, duh, I mean, it was like I was already there in one sense.
You didn't need any extra.
Well, you always can take.
Yes, but I'm
but
saying it was
I was sort of like, it wasn't like, oh, how am I going to do this, or what's the musicality, or sort of like, yeah, don't count for me. You're getting in my. I know the music. I hear it. I feel it. I don't need to go like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. But again, that's my style. Other people need the count, so there's nothing against counting.
Did you have a relationship beyond the studio with Maria much? Or?
To the extent, once I came to New York, when she'd come, and I would see her every so often, but she came to my wedding, yes. And Miss Ryman, who was her best friend, and her daughter, Maria's daughter, Elise, is named after Miss Ryman. Although I never had Miss Ryman as a teacher because I was not an SAB baby, but she was just lovely. And yes, so I saw her. I would see her. Like the last time I saw her was happily with my children, and it was in Martha's Vineyard. So I would see her when possible. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Was she ever not Maria? Not Maria.
Well, are we ever not us? She was always Maria, but she had a sense of humor. So when we were sort of like out of the, she would laugh about things, and she could make fun of me, and I would be, yes, you're right, or whatever. Be, oh, Heléne. But she had a generosity too. I remember one time we had driven up to her country house in Highland Park, and it was raining, pouring, just torrential, and we had a used car, and the windshield wipers weren't so great. And I was like, oh, we got to get... And my mother had gone up because she wanted to speak with us about my future. And we were like, oh, we have to get going because, it's pouring rain, and then the windshield wipers aren't working. And she was like, oh, well, leave your car here. Take my little brown car. And her little brown car was like a Mercedes sports car, and I was like, yes, and my mother was like, no, we're not taking her car, let's go. So she had she was a 360 person. Mm-hmm. It's just in the studio, of course, you're there to work.
But it sounds like throughout the through line is like generosity.
Yes, but also with a toughness. I keep coming back to that word tough, and I don't mean it in a negative way, but she didn't spoon feed you, and she didn't mollycoddle you, and she didn't, if she said something and she knew that was going to hurt your feelings, kind of so be it, because we are in the service of the greater good, and your feelings are secondary in one sense. So, one time she did call me, and Mr. B had come out to choreograph, and she called me and she said, well, Mr. B is interested in you. I don't know why. He asked me about the Hawaiian girl. She said, I don't know. I think you stopped working. And I was like, but then I thought, okay, well, then I have to do something. If she thinks I've stopped working, have I stopped working? She told it to you straight.
Do you think in a way she was trying to get you ready so that you could?
I'm not sure about that. Okay. I think she might have preferred that I stay in Chicago, mm-hmm. For other reasons, because she was trying to build her own company, mm-hmm. which she did. Because Chicago did not have a robust dance or ballet you know, unlike all the other art forms like the symphony, the art museum, and then theater and comedy. I mean,
Opera is amazing.
opera, right? And that's how she got, you know, Carol Foxes, who lured her into creating this, you know, sort of like her next step in life. You know, she she reinvented herself in the sense of she was never a director of a company, so she had a new career change, and it was because of the opera.
And so, after she told you that, you said, did you feel like you were working harder after that? Or what was your reaction?
I was like, I was a little like taken aback, like, well, I think I'm working hard, you know what I mean? But so then I was like, well, I'm just going to have to work even harder or make it show in another way, in a more, you know, well, have to think about it, right? So she made me think.
Mm-hmm. And was she different to you in any way after Balanchine expressed interest, or?
No. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, if George likes you, I like you too. No. I mean,
Well, I was thinking the opposite. But
oh. No.
Good.
No. She was true and pure in her, and like I say, in her service to the art form. You know, I don't mean to sound quasi-religious, but I think it is.
And how did you maintain contact when you did join the company in '78?
I think by then I had been going back in the summers when we were off and doing some of her, you know, like Navy peer programs or something. But by then, once I was with the company, I was sort of like, you know, full on with the company. So only if I'd go home for a vacation, or on the rare occasion that City Ballet would tour in Chicago. It toured once in my career, if you can imagine. I mean, and that was also part of the thing where in Chicago I had not had this experience with the Balanchine work. It was like, if it was on PBS, what did I get to see? Tarantella, which is not exactly up my alley, although I pulled out my tambourine and I was dancing around the house, but Tarantella and Duo. And that was kind of sort of it. City Ballet did not tour. And then Ravinia in the summer when I was a bit older and I was a bug. So that was my, you know, what you could see nowadays. Of course, everybody, thank God for the internet in that regard, that you can see so much. You can be in the middle of anywhere and be learning and seeing and understanding. So really when she came and was starting to teach, I had never experienced Balanchine technique, and I don't want to call it Balanchine, but you know, just a different way. So her teaching every day was critical in terms of me catching up in the way that would make me viable with no real SAB time, and then, you know, to sort of jump into the world.
Do you remember the first Maria role you got to learn or work on with the company?
With the company? I think it might have been Sugar Plum. It's so funny, I haven't thought about it like that. Yeah. Oh, you're going to make me think now. Sugar Plum. Yeah.
And are there any other...
I mean,
can you talk a little bit about the roles you did share?
So roles that weren't made, she danced so many roles, so certainly roles that weren't made on her, we would, like Barocco, she did Barocco, I did Barocco, Sugar Plum, I mean, actually Dewdrop was the first role Mr. B called me to, so that was a Tanny, so I guess he kind of, anyway.
Makes sense with the...
First movement Bizet, and it's funny. So first movement Bizet is very hard. It's deceptive. I don't know that the audience sees it or gets it. And she did say something funny to my what's about first movement. She was like, well, you know, Tanny gets out there and does second movement and the audience claps and loves it, but first movement, I was like, I'm with you there, girl. It's first movement is the unspoken, you know, I mean, Yeah. What else? I'm trying to think now. Orpheus. You're making me think. She did Serenade, I did Serenade. Yeah.
Did you ever think about her in roles like, I'm thinking Vienna, something so beautiful and glamorous, but that's obviously something she never performed, did
Right,
she?
because it came after her. Honestly, I will say by then I had been so informed by the originals that I had seen and was by then being coached by, that I didn't necessarily think of Maria. However, one could easily see when you look at Karen and you look at some of her Liebeslieder, or in First Movement, which I did and also did Merry Widow, you see that same thing. It's not like one year he taught this and the next year he taught that. I mean, it's the gospel, and you see when it works how it really works, and how it transforms a person, even in their eyes. Like when I coach and I stage, I talk to the dancers about there's a difference between looking and seeing. And in a dancer, you can see the dancers, they're doing their best, they're out there, and they're looking. Obviously, they wouldn't, but they're just looking. It's sort of like shopping at Cinderella. You've got that dead fish eye. And then there are the dancers who are, there's something more, and that's who brings the audience in a totally different way, consciously or unconsciously. But it's sort of like all the senses. Your eyes bring you in. I remember Suzanne. Oh, now I'm getting off topic, but she told a story when she was off with Bejar, and that was a huge learning experience for her, no doubt. Painful, but yet expanded her. And she talked about how she'd gone to some sort of a performance of not a ballet thing, it was sort of like maybe some dance, I don't know, not a showgirl thing, but something that was not a balletic performance. And she was so captivated by this performer, and she saw that instead of just looking, she looked up, because the theater is full of, it's not just like the orchestra, which a lot of people tend to just dance on this one level. And she was so captivated by that, she was like, yes, there is this other. So, and then she told me that, and I was like, yes. And so now I was like, you play around when you're learning different things. But I don't know why I got off topic on that.
Sorry, that's my fault. No, but it's interesting you brought up Karen, because now I'm just putting together that you kind of got to work with like the whole lineage of ballerinas. And so, can you talk a little bit about that through line from from Maria to the Karens? And
well, definitely
beyond?
an embarrassment of riches, and also, Mr. B and Jerry and Lincoln in his own way, who brought a genius. It was just the best. I don't know how else to, there are no fancier words than to have been trained by one of his earliest creative people, but then also to come to the school and have Danilova, who was an even earlier iteration of a relationship and of his formative, years and where he was. So all of these people just, put their pinch of salt and their paprika and their what have you, and then it was up to me to sort of synthesize all of it and absorb it and yet make it my own too. And that's always the challenge too, because with the archives and the originators coming in, it's a fine line between what was done, what's been changed, how's it evolved, and how do you bring, not so much make it your own, because that's ownership, but how do you bring something additional, or how do you find something more, or share something more with the audience in a role? But yes, so for me coming in and being in the class with Suzanne, Karen, Meryl, Patty, Kay, I missed Violette, but I had the benefit of her her teaching and coaching when she came. Allegra was there. And then the wonderful soloists and the corps dancers too. I mean, there was just a total respect for everyone. And the level was, it was relevant, but it was irrelevant in the sense that, you know, when you got to be chosen and you were with one of those senior corps girls, and all of a sudden you were like in Allegro or in one of the 5 girls in Who Cares or something, you were like, oh wow, I'm playing with the big dogs now. So a respect for everyone that came through.
Did you ever hear Maria compliment a dancer's performance either to them or behind their back?
Yes, yes. Probably more often not to their face, but yes, I have. Yeah.
And you don't have to say names, but
No.
can you say maybe what she might have, what did a compliment from Maria sound like maybe?
Well, I will tell you someone she absolutely complimented, and that was Suzanne. She 100% was very complimentary about Suzanne and what she brought, and that she was different in that, but that, you know, that she was wonderful, and everything that was said about her. I remember another dancer had been given a role, and she was very good. She was surprised. But, you know, that's not unusual. A lot of us sometimes will see someone and be like, oh, wow, they were really, I didn't expect that. And so, you know, that spoke to Mr. B as well for choosing the dancer and coaching the dancer and making that dancer bring something that we did not see. And so, yes, no, she absolutely. And at other times she was like not so complimentary, but I think that's normal. I think, you know, we get judged, and I guess in a way we judge. So.
Well, I guess the question is like now that you're no longer dancing but passing it on.
Trying to, hoping
Yeah,
to.
but what does Maria bring to you in that respect? Like, are you similarly?
Musicality is, you know, by the time you're specifically working with someone on a role or you're staging or something, and, you know, yes, we'll say point your feet till we're blue in the face, and we all know that, and we always, everyone goes to look at a videotape of themselves and they're like, oh God. It's that other stuff, the stuff that makes the magic. So musicality is very important to me. So like if I'm, you know, working on Agon or you know, Emeralds, very different, but it's all in the music. You know, it informs everything you do. All you have to do is listen, and it takes you there. You know, and what Mr. B said about music and, you know, seeing the music and hearing the dance. I mean, you know, it's kind of like, I'm not going to reinvent that wheel, but yeah.
Did he ever say anything to you about Maria?
Not in so many words. I mean, you know, but, you know, oh, Maria's girl, or, you know, and that sort of thing. But nothing like, oh, you're doing this just like Maria did. No, none of that kind of thing. You know, I was me, and
It must have been nice to have been known as Maria's girl.
And Jerry used to say that, oh, you know, Chicago, Maria's girl. I was like, yes, but now, can I be me? Can I be your girl?
Well, you ended
But
up
yes,
being.
I did.
Yes, so,
I did, thankfully. Yeah.
But not a bad place to start as Maria's girl.
No. Yeah, it's I was blessed.